My son laughed, calling me a burden at Christmas dinner. I left quietly. Next morning, his company account was empty. The grand dining room of Sterling and Celeste Hayes's opulent mansion shimmered under the warm glow of crystal chandeliers, a meticulously crafted tableau of festive excess designed to impress rather than to comfort. A towering Christmas tree, a verdant behemoth adorned with bespoke, hand-blown glass ornaments and shimmering, perfectly spaced lights, dominated one corner, its base piled high with an extravagant array of gifts. Each present, wrapped in designer paper so stiff it crackled with the promise of luxury, was tied with satin bows that seemed too perfect to untie. The air was thick with the rich, cloying scent of roasted turkey, expensive, oak-aged wine, and the sugary sweetness of gingerbread, mingling with the brittle, performative laughter of the Hayes family and their select circle of equally affluent, equally superficial friends. Evelyn Thorne, at 72, sat at the head of the polished mahogany table, a quiet observer amidst the cacophony, her presence often overlooked, her thoughts unheard. Her silver hair, meticulously styled into a soft, elegant bun, framed a face etched with the faint, delicate lines of time, yet her eyes, a startlingly clear, deep blue, held a depth of wisdom and unspoken sadness that few bothered to truly see, much less acknowledge. She wore a simple, elegant black dress, a stark and deliberate contrast to Celeste's glittering, sequined gown and Sterling's impeccably tailored, expensive silk suit. The conversation, as always, revolved around the acquisition of material possessions, recent luxury purchases boasted about with casual arrogance, and the grand, often unattainable, plans for the coming year. There was talk of a ski trip to Verbier, a new, custom-built yacht destined for the Mediterranean, and the ever-present, increasingly desperate, expansion plans for Sterling's struggling tech startup, Innovate Tech. Sterling, a man in his late 40s whose hairline was receding faster than his business profits were rising, held court, his voice booming with an affected confidence that felt more like a desperate plea for validation. Celeste, his wife, a woman whose beauty seemed to be meticulously maintained by an endless stream of cosmetic enhancements and designer labels, nodded approvingly at his every pronouncement, her smile brittle and unwavering, a carefully constructed facade of perfect wifely adoration. Evelyn watched them, a familiar weariness settling in her bones. This was their ritual, their unchanging script, and she, the silent financier, was merely a prop in their lavish play. As the evening wore on, the champagne flowed like a river of forgetfulness, and the volume of the laughter intensified. Evelyn found herself growing profoundly weary of the relentless materialism, the shallow conversations, the utter lack of genuine human connection. She had watched her grandchildren, 15-year-old Brandon and 13-year-old Chloe, tear through their presents with a practiced indifference, their fingers flying over expensive wrapping paper. They barely registered what they had received before tossing it aside, already bored by the sheer abundance, their eyes scanning for the next, even more extravagant item. A gentle sigh, almost imperceptible, escaped Evelyn's lips, unnoticed by most. She thought of the humble Christmases of her own youth, where a single, thoughtfully chosen gift brought boundless joy. A stark contrast to this manufactured merriment. Then, a lull in the conversation, a rare moment of quiet, presented an opening, and Evelyn, ever the pragmatist, ever the hopeful idealist despite all evidence, decided to offer a small, heartfelt suggestion, a tiny seed of a different kind of Christmas. "You know," Evelyn began, her voice soft but clear, cutting through the lingering echoes of laughter, "I was thinking this year, perhaps for next Christmas, we might consider a slightly more modest approach to gift-giving. Perhaps focusing on experiences, or even donating to charity in each other's names? It feels like we have so much already." She paused, a flicker of hope in her clear blue eyes that someone, anyone, might genuinely consider her words. A silence, sharp and sudden, fell over the table, so complete it was as if someone had pressed a mute button on their festive charade. Forks clattered onto plates, the metallic sound jarring in the sudden hush. Every eye, suddenly, was on Evelyn, not with interest or consideration, but with a collective, barely veiled annoyance. Celeste's perfectly sculpted smile faltered, replaced by a look of thinly veiled irritation, her lips tightening into a hard line. Sterling, who had been mid-anecdote about his latest, groundbreaking, and, as Evelyn knew too well, utterly unfunded, project, paused, his face twisting into a dismissive sneer, a familiar expression that Evelyn had come to dread over the years. Then, he threw his head back and let out a loud, booming laugh, a sound devoid of genuine mirth, more a performative expulsion of air, designed to draw attention, to belittle. It echoed through the grand room, drawing all eyes, making sure everyone heard his contempt. "Honestly, Mother," Sterling declared, his voice dripping with condescension, a dismissive wave of his hand accompanying his words, as if swatting away an annoying, persistent fly. "You're such a burden sometimes, always spoiling the fun with your dreary old person talk." The laughter of the guests was nervous, polite, but it was there, a quiet chorus of agreement with Sterling's dismissal. The words, though delivered with a laugh, landed like a cold, sharp blade, piercing through the carefully constructed wall Evelyn had built around her heart over decades. It wasn't just Sterling's words, sharp as they were, it was the immediate, unhesitating response from the rest of the table. Celeste's snicker, loud and unapologetic, a sound Evelyn had come to associate with her own humiliation. The suppressed giggles from Brandon and Chloe, who had been taught by example to mock their grandmothers' outdated views, their young faces already mirroring the contempt of their parents. The uncomfortable shifts of the friends, who chose to look away, unwilling to challenge the host, or perhaps, secretly agreeing. It was a complete, collective rejection. A lifetime of silent sacrifice, of being seen as nothing more than a bottomless purse, of holding her tongue, of trying to bridge an ever-widening chasm with money, culminated in that one, dismissive laugh. The insult wasn't just about her suggestion, it was about her very presence, her very being. She was a burden. A dreary old person. An inconvenience. A relic to be tolerated only for her financial utility. The realization hit her with a clarity that was both painful and liberating. There was no hope. There would be no change. Evelyn felt a peculiar, profound calm descend upon her. It was not resignation, not despair, but a clarity born of absolute finality. The last thread of hope, stretched thin over years of disappointment, had finally snapped. Her blue eyes, which had held so much quiet longing for connection, for a shared moment of genuine warmth, now hardened, becoming as cold and impenetrable as glacial ice. She did not raise her voice. She did not argue. She did not even offer a rebuttal. There was nothing left to say. There was nothing left to give. Slowly, deliberately, with a grace born of deep-seated resolve, Evelyn placed her linen napkin beside her half-eaten plate, the festive food suddenly tasting like ash. She pushed her chair back, the soft scrape of wood against the polished floor the only sound in the suddenly hushed room. She rose, her posture straight, her head held high, her gaze steady, not meeting anyone's eyes, as if they no longer mattered. She simply turned and walked towards the grand entrance, her steps measured and unhurried, each one a silent declaration of her independence. No one stopped her. No one called out. The only sound was the faint tinkle of ice in a glass as someone nervously shifted, a testament to the awkward silence she left in her wake. The cold night air hit her face as she stepped out of the mansion, a cleansing shock after the stifling warmth of the dining room. The distant sound of Christmas carols from a neighbor's house, singing of joy and peace, felt like a stark, ironic contrast to the emotional wasteland she had just left. She did not look back. Not once. She got into her modest, but well-maintained, sedan, a vehicle she had chosen years ago for its reliability and fuel efficiency, not its flashiness, much to Celeste's constant, dismissive remarks, and drove away, leaving the glittering facade and the ungrateful hearts behind. The silence in her own quiet home felt less lonely, infinitely less lonely, than the company she had just departed. As she sat in her living room, the familiar scent of old books, lavender, and quiet comfort surrounding her, a profound shift occurred within Evelyn. The floodgates of her long-suppressed emotions had finally burst, not with a torrent of tears or a storm of rage, but with an icy resolve that settled deep in her bones, firm and unyielding. The next morning, as dawn painted the sky with hues of gentle gray, promising a new day, Evelyn Thorne knew exactly what she had to do. His company account would be empty. Their well-oiled machine of exploitation was about to grind to a halt. To understand the profound, almost tectonic shift that had occurred in Evelyn Thorne. One had to delve into the labyrinthine corridors of her past, a past defined by immense wealth and an even greater, unfulfilled longing for genuine affection. Evelyn had not been born into money. Her youth had been one of comfortable modesty, a stark contrast to the gilded cage her later life became. She remembered fondly the small, cozy home where she grew up, the scent of her mother's baking, the simple pleasures of reading by the fire. It was her late husband, Richard Thorne, who had amassed the colossal fortune. Richard, a brilliant and driven man with an almost singular focus, had been a pioneer in the early days of software development. He built a tech empire from the ground up, a company that revolutionized data management, making him a Silicon Valley legend. Their life together had been a whirlwind of innovation and ambition, Richard always pushing forward, always building. Evelyn admired him, loved him deeply, but his life had been consumed by his work, often leaving Evelyn feeling like a cherished ornament rather than a true partner, placed lovingly on a shelf, but rarely truly engaged with. After his death 5 years prior, a peaceful passing in his sleep after a long, fulfilling career, Evelyn inherited every last cent, a diversified portfolio of investments, sprawling real estate holdings across the globe, and liquid assets that made her one of the wealthiest women in the state. Richard had loved Evelyn deeply, in his own way, but his all-consuming passion had been his work. He provided her with everything material, lavished her with gifts, but moments of deep, emotional connection were rare, overshadowed by his relentless drive. After his death, the immense wealth, instead of bringing joy or a sense of security, brought a different kind of burden. Her only son, Sterling, and his wife, Celeste, saw it not as a legacy to be stewarded, but as a never-ending fount from which to draw, a personal ATM dispensing luxury and convenience without limit. From the moment Richard's will was read, the shift in Sterling and Celeste's demeanor was palpable. Before, they had been merely demanding, their requests cloaked in polite suggestions. Now, they were openly entitled, their demands delivered with an air of absolute expectation. Evelyn, still raw with grief, still navigating the vast emptiness Richard had left, had been vulnerable. She had wanted to preserve a connection with her son, to feel useful, to show her love in the only way they seemed to understand, through boundless financial generosity. She believed, deep down, that by providing for them, she would secure their love, their appreciation. It was a tragic, silent bargain. The first major investment was Sterling's lavish home, the very mansion where the fateful Christmas dinner had taken place. Sterling and Celeste had found their dream home, a sprawling estate in the most exclusive part of town, complete with a private pool, tennis courts, and sprawling gardens. It was, however, far beyond their meager means. Evelyn, wanting her son to have what he desired, desperate for his approval, had quietly paid the substantial down payment, over $2 million, and then, when Sterling's initial business ventures faltered, as they always did, she had taken over the monthly mortgage payments, a sum exceeding $30,000 a month. "It's an investment in your future, dear," she had told Sterling, trying to frame it as an act of empowering her son, who merely nodded, a vague promise of paying her back someday, evaporating into the ether before the words had even left his lips. Evelyn remembered the empty echo of that promise. Then came the cars. Not just one, but a fleet that rotated with astonishing frequency. Sterling's sleek, imported sports car, costing over $200,000, was replaced every 3 years, always leased through Evelyn's accounts, a new model appearing without so much as a discussion. Celeste's luxury SUV, upgraded just as frequently, always the newest, most expensive model. Evelyn recalled Celeste once scoffing, "Oh, Evelyn, that sedan of yours is so practical. Doesn't it just scream suburban mom?" Even the children, Brandon and Chloe, had been given expensive, top-of-the-line vehicles as soon as they turned 16, their insurance and maintenance bills, of course, paid by the grandma's fund, as they casually referred to it. Evelyn remembered a specific, particularly galling instance. Brandon had totaled his first car within 6 months of receiving it, a reckless act born of youthful exuberance and no regard for consequences. Instead of remorse, he had called Evelyn, not Sterling, demanding a new, even more expensive model, claiming it was his right as a Hayes, and that he needed to maintain appearances for his friends. Evelyn, sighing internally at the familiar entitlement, had complied, feeling a familiar ache of disappointment. The grandchildren's education was another significant drain on Evelyn's coffers. Brandon and Chloe attended the most exclusive private schools, their tuition fees, myriad extracurricular activities, from equestrian lessons to private tutoring, and lavish international school trips all covered by Evelyn. Annual tuition alone for both children exceeded $150,000, a sum that could fund several college educations. Evelyn often offered to help them with their studies, or attend their school plays, hoping for a moment of shared connection, but she was always politely, or not so politely, rebuffed. "Mother, you wouldn't understand the curriculum, it's terribly modern," Sterling would say, or Celeste would dismissively add, "Oh, we have it handled, Evelyn. You really don't need to bother yourself." They spoke to her as if she were a kindly, but ultimately irrelevant, relic from another era. But the most significant black hole for Evelyn's wealth was Sterling's Innovate Tech. It was a startup that, despite its grand name, produced little innovation and even less profit. Sterling had a knack for grandiose presentations, for talking a big game, but lacked any real business acumen, any tangible product, any discernible path to profitability. Evelyn had poured millions into it over the years, multiple rounds of seed funding and bridge loans, covering payroll, exorbitant office rent in a trendy district, flashy marketing campaigns, and even Sterling and Celeste's exorbitant salaries from the company, which were completely unjustified by its abysmal performance. She had hoped that by funding his dream, she would earn his respect, perhaps even his gratitude, a son finally finding his footing. Instead, each bailout only deepened his sense of entitlement, and his belief that her money was limitless and her patience eternal. He saw her as a backup plan, not a partner. Beyond these major expenditures, Evelyn covered an endless stream of smaller, yet equally significant, costs. Celeste's designer wardrobe, updated seasonally with the latest runway trends, bills that routinely ran into six figures. The family's lavish vacations to exotic locales, from private villas in Tuscany to secluded resorts in the Maldives, all arranged and paid for by Evelyn's staff. The household staff at the mansion, gardeners, housekeepers, private chefs, even a dog walker for their pampered poodle, their salaries drawn directly from Evelyn's accounts. The high-end credit card bills that arrived each month with dizzying sums, from exclusive club memberships to extravagant dinners and impulse luxury purchases, all were settled by Evelyn's financial team, often without a word, simply because the bills were routed to her, an established norm of their parasitic existence. Evelyn often wondered if they even knew, or cared, where the money came from. The emotional cost to Evelyn was far greater than the financial one. She yearned for simple affection, a genuine conversation, a shared meal without the underlying tension of obligation and expectation. She often invited Sterling, Celeste, and the grandchildren to her own, more modest, but cozy home for dinner, hoping for an evening of familial warmth. These invitations were almost always met with flimsy excuses: "We're terribly busy, we have other plans, darling," or the particularly cutting, "Oh, mother, your house is so quaint. We prefer to entertain at ours, you know. More space for the staff." When they did visit, it was often brief, with Sterling checking his phone constantly, barely looking up from the screen, and Celeste making thinly veiled remarks about Evelyn's old-fashioned decor, her perfectly preserved antique furniture, her preference for quiet evenings. Evelyn remembered a particularly hurtful incident from just last year. She had fallen ill with a severe flu, unable to get out of bed for days, feeling frail and terribly alone. She had called Sterling, hoping for a visit, even just a check-in, a comforting word. He had dismissed her concerns, saying, with a tone of exasperated annoyance, "Mother, you have staff. Just call them. I'm too busy with Innovate Tech right now, you know how crucial this period is." He hadn't visited, nor had Celeste. It was her longtime housekeeper, Maria, a kind, warm woman who Evelyn considered more family than her own son, who had nursed her back to health, bringing her homemade soup and checking on her constantly. The memory was a sharp, painful reminder of where her true loyalty lay. She witnessed their open mockery, the casual cruelty, with a growing sense of despair. At family gatherings, when Evelyn would express a conservative opinion, a thought rooted in timeless values, or offer a piece of advice rooted in her own vast life experience, Sterling and Celeste would exchange knowing glances, or even openly roll their eyes. "Oh, Mother, that's so darlingly ancient," Celeste would once quip, her voice dripping with saccharine contempt, causing others to snicker, reinforcing Evelyn's isolation. They treated her with condescension, as if her vast wealth somehow didn't compensate for her perceived lack of modern sophistication, her refusal to chase fleeting trends. Evelyn, a woman of immense pride and quiet dignity, swallowed these indignities, day after day, year after year. She told herself it was for her family, for their happiness, for the legacy of Richard. But deep down, a bitter resentment had been festering, slowly, silently, like a poison. She longed to be seen, truly seen, not as a walking bank account, but as a mother, a grandmother, a wise woman with a lifetime of experience and a heart full of love. She wanted their love, their respect, their genuine appreciation, not just their hands outstretched for money. Each slight, each dismissal, each condescending remark chipped away at her spirit, eroding her sense of self-worth, leaving her feeling hollowed out. Yet, she clung to the hope that one day, they would realize. One day, they would appreciate her, see her for who she was, not what she had. That fragile hope had finally died at the Christmas dinner. Sterling's laugh, Celeste's snicker, the grandchildren's giggles, it wasn't just a rude comment. It was a complete and utter dismissal of her entire being, a declaration that she was not just a resource, but a burden, an inconvenience, a nuisance. And in that moment, the dam broke. The decades of suppressed pain, the quiet despair of unrequited love, the endless stream of humiliation coalesced into an unshakable resolve. The woman who had given everything, who had allowed herself to be exploited for the illusion of love, was gone. In her place stood Evelyn Thorne, a woman who had finally learned that the most valuable investment she could make was in herself, in her own peace, in her own dignity. The taps were about to be turned off, and the torrent of consequences would be entirely their own. The morning after the Christmas dinner, Evelyn Thorne awoke with a clarity that felt both liberating and terrifying. The lingering scent of pine and cinnamon from her small, tastefully decorated living room felt comforting, a stark contrast to the sterile, impersonal opulence of Sterling's mansion. She ate a light breakfast, sipping her herbal tea slowly, the quiet hum of her refrigerator the only sound in the peaceful house. There was no hesitation, no wavering, no second thoughts. The decision had been made, cemented by Sterling's contemptuous laugh. The decades of silent suffering, of being taken for granted, had finally ended. At precisely 9 a.m., Evelyn picked up her phone. Her first call was to Mr. Arthur Harrison, her longtime financial advisor, a man of impeccable discretion and an astute understanding of Evelyn's vast, complex portfolio. Arthur had been with Richard's company from its early days, and he knew the Thorne family's finances intimately. "Arthur," she began, her voice steady, devoid of the usual tremor of anxiety that had sometimes accompanied her calls regarding Sterling's latest extravagant request. "I need you to liquidate every single asset that directly or indirectly benefits Sterling and Celeste Hayes. And I mean every single one. Immediately." Arthur Harrison, a man who had seen fortunes built and lost, who had managed Evelyn's accounts through years of her son's profligacy, was momentarily stunned by the uncharacteristic firmness and unwavering resolve in Evelyn's voice. He knew the extent of her generosity to her son, often advising caution, only to be met with Evelyn's quiet, yet persistent, determination to help her family and maintain a fragile peace. "Evelyn, are you absolutely certain? This is substantial. We're talking about their mortgage payments, all the car leases, the children's allowances, their credit lines, and of course, the entirety of Innovateca's operating capital. That's tens of millions, Evelyn. It will cause a significant disruption." "I am absolutely certain, Arthur," Evelyn replied, her voice leaving no room for argument, a steel edge to her tone he had rarely heard. "I want all direct debits cancelled immediately. All lines of credit associated with them, closed. Any remaining balance on their joint credit cards that I've been paying for years, paid off in full, and the cards cancelled. And as for Innovate Tech, I want every penny of my investment withdrawn. All loans called in. Effective immediately. I understand there will be legal ramifications and potential penalties for breaking contracts, for calling in loans prematurely, but I am prepared for all of them. I want a clean break, Arthur. No lingering ties. Arthur, sensing the unyielding resolve in her tone, the finality in her words, simply said, "Understood, Evelyn. I'll start immediately. This will take a few hours to set in motion, given the complexity of the portfolio and the number of accounts, but it will be done. Every last detail." He then made a mental note to clear his schedule for the next few days. This was not just a financial transaction, it was an earthquake, a seismic shift in the Thorne family's financial landscape. Next, Evelyn called Ms. Eleanor Albright, her corporate lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her late 50s who had handled Richard's estate with formidable efficiency and Evelyn's ongoing legal affairs with quiet professionalism. "Eleanor," Evelyn stated, getting straight to the point, her voice still calm, yet commanding, "I need you to draft a formal legal notice immediately. All power of attorney I may have granted to Sterling Hayes, or any financial authority he may have over any of my assets, is hereby revoked. Furthermore, I want a cease and desist order against him and Celeste from contacting me for any financial assistance, or face legal action for harassment. I also want a protective order considered, should it become necessary." Eleanor, equally surprised by Evelyn's newfound steel, by the bluntness of her demands, merely responded, "Consider it done, Evelyn. I'll have the papers drawn up and served by end of day." This is a significant step, a definitive statement. "Are you sure you're ready for the fallout? For their reaction?" "I have never been more ready, Eleanor," Evelyn confirmed, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor of anticipation, a hint of long-denied triumph, in her voice. The conversation concluded, and Evelyn placed the phone back in its cradle, a quiet sigh of relief escaping her lips. The following hours were a flurry of activity for Evelyn's financial and legal teams. Bank transfers were halted. Investment portfolios were rebalanced. Legal documents were drafted and prepared for immediate delivery. Evelyn, meanwhile, sat quietly in her living room, a strange, profound sense of peace washing over her. The oppressive weight of decades of silent obligation, of unrequited love, of constant demands, was slowly, almost palpably, lifting from her shoulders. She felt lighter, freer, more herself than she had in years. For Sterling and Celeste, the initial signs of trouble were subtle, easily dismissed as minor inconveniences, annoying glitches in their otherwise perfectly orchestrated, luxurious lives. The first crack in their gilded facade appeared that afternoon. Celeste was at her favorite high-end boutique, a place of hushed luxury and designer labels, selecting a new designer handbag, an impulse purchase she rarely hesitated to make, knowing Evelyn's funds were limitless. She presented her platinum credit card, Evelyn's card, with a flourish, a practiced air of effortless wealth. The sales assistant, after swiping it, looked up with an apologetic expression, her brow furrowed. "I'm sorry, madam, but this card has been declined." Celeste's eyes narrowed, a flicker of irritation crossing her perfectly smooth face. "Declined? That's impossible. This is a corporate account, a very high-limit card. Try again." The sales assistant tried again, and again, the machine stubbornly whirring, producing the same humiliating result. Celeste, her face flushing with anger and embarrassment, had to leave the store empty-handed, muttering under her breath about system glitches and incompetent staff. She called her bank, but their explanations were vague and unhelpful. Account closed for security reasons, unusual activity detected. She assumed it was a temporary hiccup, perhaps a fraud alert, an inconvenience that would be quickly resolved. She certainly didn't connect it to Evelyn, who was merely a docile source of funds. Later that evening, Sterling faced his own minor, yet unsettling, issue. He was trying to book first-class tickets for a last-minute business trip to New York, paid for, as always, by Innovate Tech's corporate card, a card entirely funded by Evelyn's generous investments. The online booking system kept rejecting the card, a persistent red error message flashing on the screen. He called the airline, then his bank. The bank representative informed him, with a hint of confusion in her voice, that the Innovatech corporate account had been frozen due to unusual activity and an immediate, substantial withdrawal of funds. Sterling scoffed, annoyance giving way to anger. Unusual activity? What are you talking about? It's just an investment fund. There must be a mistake, a clerical error. He ended the call, dismissing the problem as a temporary banking issue, and used his personal credit card, which, unbeknownst to him, was also heavily reliant on Evelyn's monthly infusions for its high limit and regular balance payments. He was annoyed, but not yet alarmed. The next morning, however, the small inconveniences began to escalate, rapidly, into genuine alarm, then outright panic. Sterling's assistant at Innovatech called him in a panic, her voice shrill with distress. "Mr. Hayes, the payroll didn't go through. All employees are calling, furious. And our cloud server subscription has been suspended. All our systems are down. We can't access any of our data." Sterling's blood ran cold. He immediately logged into the company's online banking portal, his fingers trembling. His eyes widened in horror. The account balance, which should have held millions, was precisely zero. Every single penny was gone. Not just frozen, but gone. A cold dread seeped into his stomach, a realization that transcended mere annoyance. This wasn't a glitch. This was an active, deliberate act. Simultaneously, at the mansion, Celeste received an automated email. It was a notice of missed payment for their luxury car leases, with stern warnings of repossession. Then another, for the private school tuition for Brandon and Chloe, demanding immediate payment to prevent expulsion. And then, the most ominous of all, a short, terse email from their mortgage lender, urgent notice. Your recent mortgage payment has been returned due to insufficient funds. Immediate action required to prevent default. Celeste, initially confused, then enraged, called Sterling, her perfectly manicured hand shaking as she held the phone. Her voice was shrill with panic and fury. "Sterling. What in God's name is going on? All our accounts are being hit. The cards, the cars, the house. What have you done?" Sterling, his own mind reeling from the empty company accounts, the shattered illusion of his business, could only stammer, I don't know. But it has to be Mother. Who else could it be? She's the only one with access to those funds. The only one with the motive to punish us." A wave of realization, cold and stark, washed over them both, a shared moment of terrifying clarity. The quiet departure of Evelyn from the Christmas dinner, her unnerving calm, her measured steps, it suddenly made terrifying, horrifying sense. The burden had indeed lifted, but not in the way Sterling had intended. The financial pipelines, once a steady, inexhaustible stream of endless bounty, had been irrevocably severed. The silence that followed Sterling's realization was deafening, broken only by the frantic pounding of their own hearts, the dawning horror of their new, unadorned reality. The storm was coming, and they were utterly, completely unprepared. The realization hit Sterling and Celeste with the force of a physical blow, a punch to the gut that left them gasping. The missing millions from Innovatech, the suddenly unpaid mortgage, the repossessed car leases, the school tuition demands, it all converged into one horrifying, undeniable truth: Evelyn. It could only be Evelyn. The dreary old person, the quiet matriarch they had so casually dismissed, had, with a quiet ruthlessness they never knew she possessed, systematically dismantled their financial empire, brick by precious brick. Panic, raw and unadulterated, consumed them. Sterling, usually so composed in his artificial world of financial jargon and corporate posturing, began to sweat profusely, cold beads forming on his forehead, his carefully coiffed hair sticking to his clammy skin. Celeste's perfectly manicured hands trembled uncontrollably as she clutched her phone, her expensive nails digging into her palm. Their opulent mansion, once a shining symbol of their effortless success and unearned status, now felt like a gilded cage with all its doors suddenly slamming shut, trapping them inside with their rapidly unraveling reality. She's gone insane. Celeste shrieked, her voice cracking with hysteria as she paced frantically across the marble floors of their vast living room. She's completely lost her mind. How could she do this to us? To her own son. To her innocent grandchildren. Her voice was laced with outrage, but also a deep, trembling fear. Sterling, his face pale and drawn, was already calculating the immediate, devastating damage. Innovatech is dead in the water, Celeste. We have no operating capital. Employees are already calling, furious, demanding their paychecks. Suppliers are demanding payment for services. And the house, they'll foreclose. Our reputation. Everything we've built, everything we are, will be ruined. He grabbed his car keys, his movements jerky and desperate. We have to go to her. Now. She has to reverse this. She has to. His voice held a desperate, almost childlike belief that she would, that she must. They drove to Evelyn's modest home, a place they usually avoided, deeming it beneath them, too small, too quaint for their sophisticated tastes. In a frenzy, the silence in their luxury car thick with fear, a burgeoning rage, and a terrifying sense of vulnerability. When they arrived, Sterling hammered on her front door, his knuckles raw against the solid wood, his impatience bordering on violence. Celeste stood beside him, her face a mask of furious indignation, her carefully applied makeup unable to hide the frantic glint in her eyes. Evelyn opened the door herself, her expression serene, almost placid, a picture of calm amidst their storm. She was dressed simply, in a comfortable cardigan and slacks, looking entirely unbothered, perhaps even a little bemused, by their frantic appearance. Her blue eyes, however, held a glint of steel, a quiet resolve that sent a shiver down Sterling's spine. Mother! Sterling burst out, unable to contain his panic and fury, pushing past her into the hallway without invitation, Celeste following closely behind, her eyes darting around Evelyn's cozy, unpretentious living room with a mixture of disdain and desperate hope. What have you done? What is the meaning of all this? My company, the house, everything is gone. Are you trying to ruin us? To destroy our lives? Evelyn closed the door quietly behind them, her movements deliberate, unhurried, a stark contrast to their frenetic energy. She walked into her living room and gestured to the sofa, inviting them to sit, as if this were a routine social call, a polite afternoon tea. They remained standing, too agitated, too consumed by their burgeoning despair, to settle. I have simply ceased funding your lifestyle, Sterling, Evelyn stated, her voice calm, utterly devoid of emotion, a cool breeze in their hurricane. And your company. It's quite straightforward, really. The money is mine to do with as I please. Straightforward? Celeste screeched, her voice rising in pitch, her carefully maintained composure crumbling. You call destroying your family's life straightforward? Evelyn, you are a cruel, heartless woman. Do you want us to be homeless? Do you want your grandchildren to be thrown out of school? Their lives ruined? Her voice bordered on a wail, a desperate attempt at emotional manipulation. Sterling, ever the opportunist, regaining a semblance of his usual manipulative charm, stepped forward, attempting to control the narrative. Mother, please. Let's be rational. You're clearly upset about something. Was it Christmas dinner? I was just joking. You know how I am. A little too much champagne, perhaps, a slip of the tongue. But surely you don't mean to destroy everything we've built because of a silly joke, a trivial misunderstanding. He tried to take her hand, to offer a comforting, deceptive touch, but Evelyn subtly pulled back, her rejection firm and silent. A silly joke? Evelyn's voice remained even, but an undercurrent of profound weariness, of decades of suppressed pain, finally surfaced, a quiet but powerful force. Sterling, I have spent decades being your personal ATM, decades watching you and Celeste squander millions on fleeting luxuries, on businesses that never materialized, while offering me nothing but disdain and contempt. My late husband worked his entire life, pouring his genius and his very essence into building that fortune, not for you to treat it as an endless piggy bank with no thought for its source, or the person providing it. It was his legacy, and you defiled it. That's unfair. Celeste interjected, indignant, her eyes flashing. We are your family. You're supposed to help us. It's your duty as a mother. As a grandmother. What kind of matriarch are you? Evelyn turned her gaze to Celeste, her clear blue eyes holding a piercing intensity that made Celeste flinch. Duty? Is it my duty to fund lavish homes you never truly appreciated, while I lived here, alone, longing for a visit? Is it my duty to buy you new luxury cars every few years while you openly mocked my sensible sedan? Is it my duty to pay for private schools for grandchildren who barely acknowledge my existence, let alone show an ounce of gratitude, who giggle when their parents insult me? Her voice began to rise slightly, the carefully controlled dam breaking, the decades of suppressed pain and humiliation finally finding an outlet, raw and honest. I funded your son's failing company for years, pouring millions into a black hole of empty promises and grand illusions, hoping that one day, he would finally stand on his own 2 feet, or at least show me a flicker of respect for my belief in him. Instead, I was met with constant demands, dismissive waves of the hand, and open mockery. You saw me as a resource, never a person. You saw my money, never my heart. Sterling tried again, his tone shifting from manipulative charm to desperate pleading, a flicker of genuine fear in his eyes. Mother, please. Innovate Tech is on the verge of a breakthrough. We just need a little more time, a little more capital to get us over the hump. If you pull out now, everything will collapse. All those years of investment, wasted. All your money, gone. Wasted indeed, Evelyn replied, a bitter, mirthless smile playing on her lips. Wasted on a son who called me a burden for daring to suggest a moment of humility, a moment of compassion. Wasted on a family who found my presence dreary and my opinions old-fashioned, who laughed at my heartfelt suggestion. Wasted on people who saw me as nothing more than a source of infinite funds, never as a person who longed for a simple hug, a kind word, or a genuine conversation. Never as a mother who loved you, Sterling, and grieved the loss of the son I once knew. Celeste resorted to her ultimate weapon, emotional blackmail, tears welling in her eyes, expertly deployed. But the children, Evelyn. Think of Brandon and Chloe. What will happen to them? They'll be devastated. Their friends, their schools, their entire lives. You're punishing them. You're destroying their future. Evelyn's gaze hardened, becoming as cold as steel. Brandon and Chloe are old enough to understand consequences. Perhaps this will be the lesson they truly need, a lesson their parents clearly failed to teach them. A lesson in what happens when one takes everything for granted and gives nothing in return. Their parents chose to live a life of excess based on borrowed money and unearned entitlement. Now, they must learn to stand on their own. Just as you, Sterling, must learn to run a business without my endless bailouts, without relying on anyone else's money but your own earned income. Sterling's face contorted in a mixture of fear, fury, and bewildered disbelief. You can't do this. This is emotional abuse. Financial abuse. I'll sue you. I'll tell everyone what you've done. You'll be ruined. Your reputation will be in tatters. He puffed out his chest, trying to regain some semblance of control through intimidation. Evelyn chuckled, a dry, mirthless sound that sent a shiver down their spines, a sound of absolute victory. Sue me for what, Sterling? For managing my own money? For withdrawing my own investments? For stopping payments I was under no legal obligation to make? My lawyers are already prepared for any frivolous legal action you might attempt. And as for telling everyone, please, do. Tell them about the 72-year-old widow who finally said, enough, to her ungrateful, parasitic son and his equally grasping wife. Tell them about the millions I poured into your life, only to be called a burden at Christmas dinner. Let's see whose reputation is truly ruined, Sterling. Yours, built on a foundation of lies and borrowed money, or mine, built on integrity and self-respect. The air crackled with the weight of Evelyn's words, each one a hammer blow to their carefully constructed reality, shattering it into irreparable pieces. Sterling and Celeste stood, stunned into silence, their threats and manipulations having utterly failed, their desperate pleas falling on deaf ears. Evelyn, finally, felt a profound release, a deep, cleansing breath of freedom. The burden wasn't hers anymore. It was theirs. "My decision is final," Evelyn stated, her voice quiet but absolute, a definitive pronouncement. "You will receive no more money from me, ever. You are on your own. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have plans." She walked towards the front door and opened it, a silent but firm dismissal. Sterling and Celeste, their faces a ghastly shade of white, turned and stumbled out, like dazed moths fleeing a fire, the grand confrontation ending not with Evelyn's defeat, but with her resounding, unyielding victory. Sterling and Celeste walked out of Evelyn's modest home, not with the furious defiance they had arrived with, but with a dazed, hollow emptiness that chilled them to the bone. The slamming of Evelyn's front door behind them echoed in their minds, a final, definitive period to their life of effortless luxury, a punctuation mark on the end of their unearned entitlements. The drive back to their mansion, which had seemed so short in their panic-fueled rush, now felt endless, each mile bringing them closer to the cold, stark reality of their new existence, a reality stripped bare. The immediate fallout was brutal and swift, a cascade of financial ruin. Within days, the full weight of Evelyn's decision crashed down upon them like a relentless tsunami. First came the phone calls, relentless and increasingly aggressive. The bank called about the mortgage, demanding immediate payment to avert foreclosure. The car leasing companies initiated repossession procedures, sending stern notices, threatening legal action for breach of contract. The private school for Brandon and Chloe sent final warnings, tuition was overdue, and their enrollment was in jeopardy, their carefully cultivated social standing at the school already crumbling. The household staff, from the private chef who prepared their gourmet meals to the gardeners who manicured their sprawling lawns, demanded their unpaid wages and, finding no immediate resolution, simply stopped showing up, leaving the mansion to slowly succumb to neglect. Then came the catastrophic collapse of Innovate Tech. With its operating capital completely withdrawn, the company couldn't meet payroll. Employees, once loyal to Sterling's charismatic and financially backed vision, quickly jumped ship, abandoning their desks, leaving a skeleton crew and a pile of unfinished projects, dead in the water. Suppliers, no longer receiving payment, cut off services, halting all operations. Creditors began to call, threatening legal action for outstanding invoices, their patience exhausted. Sterling's groundbreaking startup, built entirely on Evelyn's money and hot air, imploded, leaving him with mounting debt, a mountain of legal threats, and a ruined professional reputation. His carefully cultivated network of investors and partners evaporated overnight, revealing them to be fair-weather friends who had only been interested in his mother's perceived influence and deep pockets, not in Sterling himself. The mansion, once their pride and joy, the cornerstone of their extravagant lifestyle, became a source of increasing anxiety, a physical manifestation of their financial ruin. Without meticulous upkeep, the sprawling estate, with its dozens of rooms and acres of land, began to show alarming signs of neglect. The pool turned green with algae, the once pristine gardens became overgrown with weeds, and dust gathered thickly in the once gleaming hallways, covering the expensive furniture. The air inside felt heavy with tension and decay. Their social standing, which they had so carefully constructed around their lavish lifestyle, crumbled just as rapidly, perhaps even faster than their finances. Their friends, once eager to attend their exclusive parties and benefit from their ostentatious generosity, suddenly became unavailable, their phone calls unreturned. Invitations to exclusive clubs and charity galas dried up. Celeste, trying desperately to maintain appearances, would suggest lunch with her usual circle, only to be met with vague excuses of prior engagements or feeling unwell. The whispers started, rumors of financial difficulties, of Sterling's business failing spectacularly, of Evelyn cutting them off. The Hayes, once the epitome of effortless wealth, were now a cautionary tale, objects of gossip and schadenfreude. Inside the mansion, the atmosphere was toxic, charged with bitterness and resentment. Sterling and Celeste, stripped of their usual distractions and luxuries, with no one left to blame but each other, turned their anger on one another. Accusations flew back and forth, sharp and cruel. "This is your fault, Sterling. Your ridiculous company, your idiotic schemes." Celeste would scream, her voice raw with fury. "My fault? You were the one spending like there was no tomorrow on designer clothes and useless trinkets, on those absurd vacations." Sterling would retort, their arguments escalating into bitter, resentful shouts that echoed through their now empty, silent halls. Brandon and Chloe, caught in the crossfire of their parents' escalating despair, became sullen and withdrawn, lashing out at their parents for their sudden change in circumstances. The children, accustomed to endless pampering, to having every desire instantly gratified, struggled immensely to adapt to a life without private chauffeurs, designer clothes, and unlimited spending money. They blamed their parents, and implicitly, their grandmother, for the sudden, rude awakening. Meanwhile, Evelyn Thorne was experiencing a different kind of fallout, a profound and liberating peace, a quiet joy that permeated her every day. The first few days after her decision, she simply basked in the quiet of her home, the welcome absence of demands, the cessation of the mental tally of her family's insatiable wants. She called Maria, her housekeeper, not for service, but simply to express her deep gratitude and to chat, to enjoy a genuine connection. She found herself smiling more, a genuine, unforced smile that reached deep into her clear blue eyes. She pulled out old photo albums, not with a pang of regret for what she had given, but with a sense of perspective for what she had gained, her freedom, her autonomy. She reconnected with an old college friend, Eleanor, a woman she hadn't seen in years, having always been too busy or too obligated to make time for true friendship. Their conversation flowed easily, full of laughter and shared memories, picking up as if no time had passed. It was a friendship based on genuine connection, on shared history, not financial leverage or social obligation. Evelyn also made a spontaneous decision, something she hadn't done for herself in decades, always planning trips for Sterling and Celeste, never for her own desires. She called a travel agent. "I want to go to Italy," she announced, her voice filled with a lightness and anticipation she hadn't felt in years. "A slow trip, through Tuscany, maybe some cooking classes. Just for me. No rushed schedules, no luxury demands, just authentic experiences." The travel agent, accustomed to Evelyn's usual requests for luxury villas for the Hayes family, was pleasantly surprised by the change. Evelyn felt a thrill of pure, unadulterated anticipation. For the first time, she was spending her money not out of obligation, not to buy love or peace, but out of pure, unadulterated desire for her own happiness. The consequences for Sterling and Celeste were devastating, but for Evelyn, they were the first sweet notes of a long-awaited symphony of liberation. 6 months later, the world had dramatically reconfigured itself for Evelyn Thorne and her estranged family. The once unbearable weight of unrequited love and constant exploitation had completely lifted from Evelyn's shoulders, replaced by an invigorating lightness, a spring in her step she hadn't known in decades. She was living a life she had only ever dreamed of, a life truly her own, on her own terms. Evelyn had indeed embarked on her Italian adventure. She spent weeks wandering through the rolling hills of Tuscany, her senses alive with the scent of cypress and olive groves. She learned to cook traditional dishes from a local nonna, her hands kneading pasta dough, her heart full. She sipped fine Chianti in sun-drenched vineyards and sketched the picturesque landscapes in a small notebook, rediscovering a forgotten talent. She wasn't staying in sterile 5-star hotels but in charming, authentic agriturismos, connecting with people who saw her not as a wealthy benefactor, but as a curious, kind woman with a thirst for life and culture. She visited small art galleries, attended local festivals, and rediscovered her profound love for classical music, attending intimate concerts in ancient churches. Upon her return, invigorated and renewed, she joined a local book club, started volunteering regularly at a local animal shelter, finding joy in simple acts of kindness, and even took up gardening, transforming her own modest backyard into a vibrant oasis of color and life. Her friendships deepened, built on shared interests and mutual respect, not on the artificial bonds of inherited wealth. Her home, once a quiet refuge from a demanding family, was now a lively hub of genuine connection, filled with laughter and meaningful conversation. Evelyn Thorne, at 73, was truly flourishing, vibrant and free, her clear blue eyes sparkling with a newfound joy. She was investing in experiences, in personal growth, and most importantly, in her own happiness, cultivating a rich inner life that no amount of money could buy. For Sterling and Celeste Hayes, the descent had been harsh and unyielding, a complete reversal of fortune. They had lost everything Evelyn had given them, every material comfort, every safety net. The mansion, unable to meet the crushing mortgage payments, was foreclosed upon and sold at auction for a fraction of its former value. Their luxury cars were repossessed, their designer wardrobes became obsolete, their social circle vanished. Innovate Tech, unable to recover from the immediate withdrawal of funds and Sterling's utter lack of business acumen, had officially declared bankruptcy, leaving a trail of unpaid debts, ruined reputations, and angry former employees. Sterling's name was mud in the tech world. They were forced to move into a small, rented apartment in a less desirable part of town, a stark, humiliating contrast to their former opulent life. Sterling, unable to secure any significant venture capital or a high-paying executive position due to his failed company and tarnished reputation, had eventually taken a job in sales at a mid-tier tech company. The work was demanding, the pay modest, and he was forced to commute daily on crowded public transport, a far cry from his chauffeured rides and private jets. He grumbled constantly, blaming Evelyn for all his woes, but the harsh reality of supporting himself, of earning his own living, had begun, slowly, to chip away at his entitled facade. Celeste, similarly, struggled immensely to adapt. Her designer wardrobe lay unused, replaced by sensible, affordable clothing bought from discount stores. Her socialite life, once the center of her universe, was a distant, painful memory. She attempted to find work, but her lack of practical skills, her perceived snobbery, and her inflated sense of self-importance made it difficult. She eventually took a part-time job at a local boutique, a source of constant humiliation for her, but a necessity to help make ends meet. The constant financial strain and the devastating loss of their social standing had taken a severe toll on their marriage. Their arguments were less about future plans and more about the bitter present, a constant blame game with no winners, only mutual resentment. Brandon and Chloe, too, had been forced to adjust to a simpler, harsher reality. They had been transferred to public school, a massive shock to their system, accustomed as they were to the pampered environment of elite private institutions. They struggled academically and socially, resentful of their new circumstances, their friends, their entire world changed overnight. While they initially blamed Evelyn, the daily realities of a simpler life and the increasing tension between their parents slowly forced them to confront the source of their previous privilege and the consequences of their parents, and their own, past entitlements. They were learning, painfully, what it meant to live without a safety net, to earn what they desired, and to face the difficult consequences of their actions and their parents' choices. There was no reconciliation with Evelyn, nor did she seek one. She had made her peace with the past, and her new life was too fulfilling, too rich with genuine happiness, to dwell on old wounds or demand apologies. The story of Evelyn Thorne, a silent matriarch who finally found her voice, served as a profound testament to an often forgotten truth: genuine love and respect cannot be bought with money. They are earned through connection, empathy, and appreciation, through mutual regard. For too long, Evelyn had mistakenly equated financial generosity with love, only to discover that it merely fostered dependency, greed, and ultimately, contempt. Her act of cutting off the financial tap was not an act of cruelty, but one of profound self-preservation and, perhaps, a tough but necessary lesson for her family. In the end, Evelyn Thorne had finally learned that the greatest act of loyalty, the deepest form of love, was not to give endlessly to those who took without thought, but to honor her own worth, to protect her own peace, and to invest in her own happiness. She had traded a life of being a walking bank account for one of boundless freedom, proving that true wealth lies not in what one possesses, but in the peace and integrity of one's spirit, in the richness of a life lived authentically and with purpose. And that, dear viewers, is the powerful story of Evelyn Thorne, a woman who, after years of silent sacrifice, finally chose herself. Her journey from quiet resentment to profound liberation is a testament to the strength that lies within us all, waiting to be unleashed. If Evelyn's story resonated with you, if you found yourself cheering for her newfound freedom and the justice she finally found, then you're in the right place. Our channel is dedicated to bringing you more compelling tales of justice, personal triumph, and invaluable life lessons, stories that remind us of the power of self-worth. Don't miss out on our next story. Make sure to hit that subscribe button right now, and ring the notification bell so you're always the first to know when we release a new video. Now, we want to hear from you. Have you ever faced a situation where your generosity was taken for granted, or where someone you loved treated you with such ingratitude? What did you do? How did you reclaim your power? Or, if you were in Evelyn's shoes, would you have reacted differently? Share your thoughts, your experiences, and your wisdom in the comments section below. Your insights help us all grow. Thank you for watching, and until next time, remember to value yourself, always.